The restaurant hummed with the low clatter of silverware and the muted laughter of men who believed no one was listening. Naomi's hands trembled as she balanced a tray, her eyes drawn again and again to the corner table where power sat disguised as arrogance. An Arab billionaire CEO leaned back in his chair, his voice sharp, his laughter sharpest of all, as if the world itself were his stage. What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that someone was about to pierce his invincible armor. Naomi's son, a boy of quiet brilliance, sat nearby, his innocence carrying a secret that would ignite everything. And in that moment, as the laughter echoed cruelly, Naomi realized she had one chance, one fleeting, dangerous chance, to turn humiliation into a reckoning. Naomi had been working at the Gilded Terrace for almost 3 years, long enough to memorize every creak in the polished wooden floorboards and every glimmer of the chandeliers that hung overhead like frozen rain. The restaurant was one of those. Establishments designed to impress the wealthy, featuring plush velvet booths, glistening marble counters, and gold-framed mirrors that reflected the faces of the powerful as though they were portraits in a gallery. For Naomi, though, it was not a gallery, but a stage, and every shift felt like stepping into a performance she had not auditioned for. She was 28, a young black woman with a quiet strength that most people overlooked. To the regulars, she was just another waitress in crisp uniform and practiced smile, someone who existed only to refill glasses and clear away plates without leaving a trace. But behind her calm eyes, Naomi carried years of invisible battles, moments of silence in the face of microaggressions, careful nods when patrons spoke down to her, and the unspoken ache of raising a child alone while chasing tips to make rent. Her resilience, like a hidden gem, shone through every challenge she faced. Her son, Marcus, was the anchor of her world. At 10 years old, he was a boy of astonishing curiosity, with a mind that absorbed knowledge like sunlight through glass. He devoured books in multiple languages, switching effortlessly between English, Spanish, and Arabic, and Naomi often marveled at how quickly he picked up new words. She had always known he was different, destined for something greater than the narrow confines of life had given them. Still, she also knew the world did not always reward brilliance, especially not when it came wrapped in black skin. That evening, Naomi had reluctantly brought Marcus to the restaurant. Her sitter had canceled at the last minute, and with rent overdue, she couldn't afford to miss the shift. Marcus sat quietly at a tucked-away corner table near the staff station, sketching in a notebook as Naomi worked. He was no trouble, but Naomi's chest tightened each time she glanced over. She hated exposing him to the cold performances she endured nightly. The dinner crowd that night buzzed with unusual intensity. A private party had reserved the long oak table in the center of the room, men in expensive suits, women in designer gowns, their laughter sharp as cutlery striking porcelain. Among them sat one man who drew everyone's gaze, tall, impeccably dressed, his voice rolling with authority. His name whispered through the staff like a rumor, an Arab billionaire CEO, rumored to be scouting for new ventures in the city. His presence carried weight. Even the manager straightened his tie more often than usual, darting forward to pour wine with his own hands. Naomi observed from the periphery, her steps steady, though her nerves prickled. She had served wealthy clients before, but this man's energy was different. Power clung to him like an invisible cloak, radiating through the table. Every laugh he gave seemed to dismiss the world around him as though nothing and no one could touch him. Naomi kept her head low, refilling glasses and setting down plates, absorbing the sharp remarks that skimmed over her like stones skipping across water. Unbeknownst to anyone, another guest sat among the crowd that evening, quieter, almost invisible. A man who introduced himself simply as Mr. Daniels, reserved, polite, observing with an intensity that most mistook for shyness. He was no ordinary guest. He was, in fact, a CEO in disguise, wealthy, powerful, and determined to see for himself how the world treated those at the bottom. He had dined at countless establishments under false names, testing not only the service, but the humanity hidden in everyday interactions. Tonight his attention was fixed on Naomi, her grace under pressure, the subtle tightening of her jaw when a customer snapped fingers in her direction, the way she glanced protectively toward her son. He noticed it all. As Naomi carried plates from the kitchen, weaving through the maze of tables, she felt the atmosphere thicken. The laughter at the billionaire's table grew louder, the jokes sharper, and with each round of wine their arrogance deepened. The tension in the air was palpable, a storm brewing in the midst of the elegant restaurant. Naomi sensed something coming, not from intuition alone, but from years of living on edge, always braced for the next insult hidden beneath a smile. She didn't yet know how the evening would unravel, but her pulse quickened each time she caught the billionaire's voice rising above the others. Across the room, Marcus looked up from his notebook. His eyes, innocent and wide, lingered on his mother, then shifted toward the powerful men at the center of it all. He didn't understand everything, but he felt it too. The tension, the imbalance, the unspoken danger curling like smoke through the air. His perception, untainted by the complexities of adult life, added a layer of vulnerability to the tense atmosphere. Naomi inhaled deeply, forcing her hands to stay steady as she placed another tray on the table. The night unfolded like a storm, but Naomi stood tall, her resilience a beacon of strength. Each time she approached the long oak table at the center of the restaurant, she sensed the eyes of the wealthy guests sliding over her, cold and assessing. They did not see a woman, a mother, or a human being with a life beyond these walls. To them, she was service, a shadow in a starched uniform, existing only to move silently and deliver what they demanded. The billionaire's laughter rang out louder than the others, filling the restaurant in waves that seemed to swallow the softer sounds of clinking glasses and hushed conversations. He gestured extravagantly as he spoke, recounting stories of luxury, private jets, palaces, and deals that shifted markets. His companions leaned in, eager to bask in the glow of his arrogance, their admiration bordering on worship. Naomi listened without meaning to. She had trained herself to let words roll past her ears like rain on glass, but tonight the air was too charged. Every boast, every dismissive remark, every mocking chuckle landed heavier than the last. She could not tune it out, not when her son sat only feet away, his wide eyes occasionally drifting to the spectacle. The billionaire's arrogance sharpened when Naomi drew near. She noticed how his gaze lingered on her skin as though weighing her worth against the gold trimmings of the room. He snapped his fingers once, twice, not to summon food or drink, but to summon her, as though she were an object at his command. Each time, Naomi forced her steps forward, reminding herself to breathe and that dignity did not always reside in words, but in endurance. Still, the sting was there, a quiet fire smoldering in her chest. The small cruelties came one after another, each a sharp reminder of the injustice Naomi faced. A condescending remark about how people like her must be grateful to work in such an establishment. A patron's smirk when Naomi carefully laid out their courses, as if expecting her to stumble. A glass pushed back at her with unnecessary force, spilling drops of red wine onto her uniform. She murmured apologies, wiping quickly, though none of the fault was hers. Her co-workers noticed but said nothing. In places like this, silence was the safest shield. The manager, too busy ensuring the billionaire's party remained pleased, offered no reprieve. Naomi knew she was alone in this performance, her dignity balancing on a tightrope above an audience that would happily see her fall. But she was not as alone as she thought. From his seat at a smaller table, Mr. Daniels, the undercover CEO, watched closely. He saw what others overlooked: the tightening of Naomi's shoulders after each slight, the way her hands shook almost imperceptibly as she steadied a tray, the glance she stole toward her son as though anchoring herself to his presence. Daniels had sat in countless restaurants before, testing the service and observing humanity, but rarely had he felt such a pull of empathy. Here was a woman who bore humiliation not out of weakness but out of necessity. He scribbled mental notes, his mind sharpening with the certainty that this evening carried weight beyond a simple dinner. Meanwhile, Marcus noticed too. From his corner table he observed the patterns, the dismissive waves of hands, the laughter that grew sharper when his mother passed, the way her eyes seemed to dim before sparking again with determination. Marcus was intelligent enough to know when someone was being belittled, even if he didn't fully grasp the adult dynamics at play. He felt a mixture of anger and confusion coil inside him. Why did they treat his mother this way? Didn't they see the strength she carried every single day? Naomi herself wrestled silently with that question. As the evening stretched on, her thoughts became heavier. She remembered other nights when customers had mistaken her patience for ignorance, when jokes about her accent, though she spoke perfect English, had been thrown like darts. She remembered the long hours she had spent coaching, Marcus to rise above such moments, never to let cruelty define him. But tonight, as she endured slight after slight, Naomi wondered how long endurance could last before it turned into something else, something braver, something dangerous. The tipping point came in a subtle form. The billionaire, growing bolder, with each glass of wine, leaned back in his chair and spoke of languages. He mocked the difficulty of learning them, boasting instead about how he hired translators to do the work. "Who needs to bother with tongues not their own?" he scoffed loudly, "when money speaks louder than anything else." His companions roared with laughter. Naomi's heart tightened as she saw the impact of the billionaire's words on Marcus. The boy who had taught himself to greet the world in 9 different languages, who believed in the power of words to bridge worlds, now faced a different kind of language, one of arrogance and disrespect. In that moment, Naomi's resolve solidified. She could not let her son learn that silence was the answer to such cruelty. As Naomi stood there, her dilemma sharpened to a blade's edge. She could continue to endure, as she always had, protecting her job and the stability it provided, or she could act, reclaim her voice, and show her son that silence was not always the answer. The risk was enormous. A single misstep could cost her everything. But the fire that had smoldered in her chest all evening now threatened to blaze, and she knew she had to act. Mr. Daniels noticed the shift. From across the room, he saw Naomi pause, saw the storm gathering in her eyes. He leaned forward slightly, heart quickening. He had come to test humanity in others, but he sensed he was about to witness something far greater, a test of courage under fire. The billionaire continued to laugh, oblivious to the weight pressing down on the room. His arrogance filled the air like smoke, choking, suffocating, leaving little space for anything else. Yet Naomi felt a strange clarity come over her, and the moment had arrived. She did not yet know how she would act, only that she must. And so, as the laughter echoed and Marcus's gaze met hers across the crowded room, Naomi steadied her breath. The decision was no longer if she would act, but when. The restaurant was alive with sound, yet Naomi heard only the pounding of her heart. The billionaire's laughter thundered across the table, cruel and careless, rising above the murmurs of lesser voices. Every note of his arrogance echoed inside. Her, pushing her toward the edge of something she could no longer contain. She had rehearsed silence for years, perfected it even. But silence could not shield Marcus tonight. He had seen too much, heard too much. He had watched her endure humiliation, and if she left the night unbroken, he would learn a lesson she could never undo. That cruelty was untouchable. That power was beyond challenge. Naomi could not allow that. Her fingers slipped into her apron, brushing against the folded napkin she had tucked there moments earlier. It was nothing more than fabric, yet it felt like a blade in her hand, small, unassuming, but capable of cutting through the arrogance that filled the room. With steady hands, she approached the billionaire's table once more. The men were mid-laughter, their glasses clinking in a mock toast to wealth and dominance. Naomi's steps felt heavier than they ever had, each one carrying the weight of a decision. She balanced a tray as though it were a shield, her eyes fixed, not on their faces but on the pristine white tablecloth where her chance would lie. She reached the table. The billionaire waved her closer with a flick of his hand, barely glancing at her as he continued his story. Naomi bent low, setting down fresh glasses. Her movements were deliberate and controlled. Then, with a subtle grace born of desperation, she slid the folded napkin onto the edge of his plate. It was quick, so quick none of the laughing men noticed. The billionaire, too engrossed in his performance, let his hand drift casually to his plate. His fingers brushed the folded fabric, curiosity flickering for the briefest moment. He unfolded it. The laughter stuttered, then faltered. On the napkin, written in neat, steady handwriting, were words simple yet searing. "My son speaks 9 languages. How many hearts can your money reach?" The words struck like a spark to dry tinder. The billionaire froze, his smirk slipping. His companions leaned in, confusion cutting through their drunken haze as they tried to glimpse the note. Silence spread outward like ripples across a pond, pulling the attention of the room toward the epicenter of the storm. Naomi's pulse thundered in her ears, but she kept her face composed, her hands folded calmly at her waist. She stood as though she had done nothing at all, as though the very air had not shifted in that moment. Yet inside, fire blazed through her veins. Marcus watched from his corner table, his small hands tightening around his notebook. His eyes widened as he realized what his mother had done. Pride swelled in his chest, pushing aside the fear. She had acted. She had defended not just herself, but him, his brilliance, his worth, his voice. For the first time that night, he felt taller than the laughter that had tried to shrink him. The billionaire's face darkened. His companions murmured uneasily, shifting in their seats. Power, so absolute only minutes before, wavered now under the weight of a truth he could not laugh away. His eyes flicked up at Naomi, sharp, calculating, but she did not flinch. She held his gaze with a quiet strength that unsettled him more than any confrontation could have. From his corner, Mr. Daniels observed every detail. He saw the ripple of silence, the falter in the billionaire's composure, the unwavering steadiness of Naomi's stance. Daniels had witnessed boardroom battles, courtroom dramas, and public scandals. Still, nothing compared to the power of this quiet act of defiance. In a single stroke, Naomi had shifted the room. She had taken a place meant for humiliation. She turned it into a stage of reckoning, altering the power dynamics in a way that was palpable to all present. The billionaire folded the napkin slowly, his jaw tight. He wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as foolishness, but the words clung to him, heavy as chains. Around him, whispers had begun. Other diners glanced over, curious, sensing the change in atmosphere. The arrogance that had filled the room minutes earlier now felt brittle, fragile. Naomi turned and walked away, her steps steady, her head held higher than it had been all night. Each stride felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she had been, forced to bury under years of silence. She did not need applause, nor recognition. The act itself was enough. The lesson, for Marcus, was enough. She returned to the staff station, her hands finally trembling as she set down her tray. Breath rushed from her lungs, not as relief, but as release. She had crossed a line she could never uncross, yet she did not regret it. Marcus's gaze followed her, filled with awe. He understood, in the way children often do, that something irreversible had happened. His mother had chosen courage over comfort, truth over silence. And though the night was far from over, Marcus knew this moment would stay with him forever, shaping his understanding of courage and resistance against power. The restaurant remained hushed for several long seconds, as if holding its breath. The billionaire's companions avoided his eyes, uncomfortable with the sudden shift. Power no longer radiated from him as before. Instead, it wavered, exposed. And across the room, a disguised CEO smiled faintly to himself, recognizing that he had just witnessed an act of defiance far more powerful than wealth. The silence broke, not with laughter, but with the scraping of chairs, the murmurs of other guests, the subtle acknowledgement that something significant had transpired. The billionaire sat rigid, the napkin folded tightly in his fist, but the echo of Naomi's words lingered louder than any boast he could summon, casting a new, more sober mood over the room. The act was done. The reckoning had begun. For a moment after Naomi walked away, silence clung to the air like smoke that refused to clear. The billionaire sat motionless, the folded napkin still clutched in his hand, his usual mask of superiority cracked open just enough to reveal something far rarer than arrogance: uncertainty. Around him, his companions shifted uncomfortably, their laughter long since extinguished, their eyes darting to one another for cues on how to react. The spectacle they had once celebrated now felt like exposure, and none of them wished to share in it. Naomi busied herself at the staff station, her hands moving automatically as she polished glasses that were already clean and folded napkins with unnecessary precision. Her body trembled beneath her uniform, adrenaline still coursing through her veins like wildfire. Every second felt stolen, as though the billionaire might call the manager, demand her dismissal, or worse. Yet when she looked across the room, at Marcus, sitting small but unbroken in his corner booth, her fear was tempered by pride. She had acted. She had defended him. Whatever came next, he would never forget that courage. Marcus beamed, his chest rising with a pride too enormous for his frame. His mother had not only endured, she had stood up even in the smallest of ways against a man who believed himself untouchable. For a boy who lived in books, who believed in the power of words, seeing them wielded so boldly gave him something greater than language: hope. The billionaire, however, could not let the moment pass quietly. His face reddened, his grip tightening around the napkin, as though he might crush the words into dust. Yet the message burned into him, branding him in ways he could not undo. The thought of being mocked, of being challenged, of being reduced by a waitress of all people, filled him with a rage that he dared not display fully in public. His empire thrived on image, and here, in this gilded restaurant, the image had cracked. Whispers stirred among the other diners. They had not read the note, but they had seen his expression, his falter, the break in his performance. Power was a fragile thing, dependent on the belief of others, and tonight, that belief had been shaken. He attempted a laugh, forced and brittle, but it fell flat in the tense air. It was then that Mr. Daniels rose from his corner table. He strolled, deliberately, his presence commanding attention, though his demeanor remained calm. No one knew his true identity, but his eyes carried the weight of authority. He had watched long enough. It was time. He approached Naomi quietly, speaking not to her, but to the manager nearby, who stiffened at his presence. Daniels requested Naomi by name, insisting she be the one to serve him dessert and coffee. It was a simple act, but in the hierarchy of the evening, it was a declaration. He was choosing her, elevating her, placing her dignity on display for all to witness. Naomi complied, her steps steadier now, her hands regaining control. She placed the tray before him, bowing her head slightly as custom dictated. Daniels thanked her, not with the clipped tone of a patron, but with genuine warmth that carried across the room. The billionaire's table shifted uncomfortably under the contrast. As Naomi turned to leave, Daniels slipped her a small envelope, his expression unreadable. She tucked it away, her mind too clouded to process the gesture fully, and returned to her station. She would discover its meaning later, in the quiet of her apartment, when she opened it to find not money, but a handwritten note. Courage deserves more than silence. We should talk. The remainder of the evening limped on. The billionaire's power dulled, his companions quieter now, their laughter muted. Naomi finished her shift with a calmness that surprised her, as though the storm had passed and left a strange clarity in its wake. When the final guests departed, she gathered Marcus, who rushed to her side with eyes glowing. He did not speak. Immediately, words seemed too small, but he hugged her tightly, his arms fierce around her waist. Naomi bent to hold him, pressing her cheek against his hair, knowing this embrace carried everything they could not say aloud. At home later, after Marcus had fallen asleep clutching his notebook, Naomi sat at the small kitchen table and unfolded the envelope again. The note from Mr. Daniels felt heavy with possibility. She did not know who he truly was, only that he had seen her, truly seen her, in a night where others had tried to erase her humanity. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine that her strength might carry her further than survival. The billionaire would return to his empire, his wealth untouched, his influence unbroken. Yet Naomi's words had pierced him in a place money could not reach. He would remember them, not as a lesson, perhaps, but as a wound to his pride, a reminder that arrogance could be challenged by something as small and fragile as handwriting on a napkin. Power, after all, was not only about wealth. For Naomi, the act was not about humiliating him. It was about Marcus. It was about showing her son that silence does not always protect, that dignity sometimes requires risk, that courage does not always roar. It can whisper and still shake the foundations of arrogance. And so the night ended not with wealth deciding the story, but with a mother's love carving its truth into the fabric of memory. Naomi had risked her job, perhaps her stability. Still, she had given Marcus something far greater, the sight of his mother choosing bravery over fear. As she drifted to sleep beside her son, Naomi wondered what he would carry from this night. Would he remember the billionaire's arrogance, or would he remember her defiance? She hoped it would be the latter. She hoped that one day, when Marcus stood before his own storms, he would recall that courage need not wait for permission. And, as the city outside hushed into the quiet hours before dawn, one question lingered, echoing louder than laughter, sharper than wealth, and more enduring than silence. When arrogance mocks brilliance, who among us will be brave enough to answer?